So I'm presenting today on some development work that we've been doing with New South Wales Health to develop up some online modules for use by primary healthcare clinicians, principally nurses in primary healthcare. And the abstract did promise that I'd show you some videos, but unfortunately any of you who have worked with government on projects would know that these are often delayed quite substantially, and that's exactly what's happened here, but they will be available later this year. So I'm going to present on the development work that we've done. So we know that obesity risks begin very early in life. And indeed, even before a baby is born, their risk for obesity can be already established. How a baby is fed, whether they're breastfed or bottle fed, can also have an effect on their risk of obesity later in life. So, and patterns of weight gain are really important, and this is where you come in. This is your common garden variety BMI for age chart. And what most children do is that they settle on a centile, and they tend to follow that centile all the way into their adulthood. In fact, I, being a bit of a BMI for age nerd, tracked my children's BMI for age every 6 months throughout their life until they were 18, much to their annoyance when they got older. And I did indeed find that they tracked the centiles rather well, and so I could gently dissuade my son from a career as a rugby union star, because I knew he wasn't really going to get tall enough. And similarly, my daughter was never going to row for Australia because she wasn't going to crack the 6 foot mark. But anyway, enough about my children. What we sometimes see is children who have what's called rapid weight gain, where they cross growth centiles. And these children are substantially more likely, in fact about 6 times more likely to be overweight or obese at age 2, and again at age 6 they will carry that weight, that excess weight, through to adolescence and adulthood. Now, we know that, that this particular issue is associated with bottle feeding. We think one of the mechanisms is that breastfed babies get to decide when they're full. They come off the breast, and parents learn to feel confident that they've had enough to eat because of their wet nappy count and things like that. But bottle-fed babies tend to be fed according to the quantity that is recommended on the side of the tin, is often where parents are getting their information from. So there's a temptation for parents to try and get that baby to finish that bottle, even if the baby is showing every sign of being full. And there's a temptation to feed that baby to a schedule, even if that baby is actually sound asleep at the time that their feed is due. And this can override those natural satiety cues and lead to excess weight gain. So we know that preventing and managing overweight and obesity should begin early, and early intervention is particularly important for people who are disadvantaged or from lower socioeconomic areas, because we don't really understand why, but they're much more likely to bottle feed and they're much more likely to experience excess weight gain. And obviously primary healthcare is a universal service that is incredibly important in identifying this. So families with young children are heavy users of primary healthcare. I don't need to tell you that. They have on average 6 visits in the first year of life. They have scheduled visits to family child health nurses or maternal child health nurses. Vulnerable families on the sustained nurse home visiting program have up to 20 visits. And of course there are other sort of drop-in visits or casual visits. So we interviewed a number of nurses to ask them what their views were and what their routine practices were around overweight and obesity in children. And what we found was that there was, our survey asked questions about what routine practices were and what they really felt they needed to better support them in intervening with parents who might have had excess weight gain in their children. And what they told us was that almost all of them routinely measured height and weight. Thank you, Melissa, for raising this as a really important issue. So they routinely measured height and weight, but they didn't routinely use weight growth charts. So there was no way of actually quantitatively looking at whether the child was indeed overweight or at risk of overweight. Most provided advice on infant feeding related to obesity, and about a third provided guidance in terms of formula preparation, but not on how to actually feed that formula around the understanding satiety and fullness cues. There was a high level of reluctance to raise weight and a lack of confidence in addressing excess weight. And the future training needs were around behaviour change techniques, what kind of portions toddlers and infants should be eating, and access to additional support and referral options. So New South Wales Health have taken this information on board and have decided to set up a set of online modules for primary healthcare providers. This is kind of unusual because, as you know, state governments usually don't get involved much in primary healthcare or general practice. So we were pretty excited when we were approached to assist with this. So the modules will be developed in line with the National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines, clinical practice guidelines. They'll be free, they'll include referral options, and they'll be available late in 2017. So to date, they have developed there's a Healthy Kids website at the moment for parents and for childcare providers, and they are indeed developing a Healthy Kids website for professionals, which is where some of these online modules will sit, but they will also be available through the APNA website. The Healthy Kids for Professionals will have a number of different tabs that align with the National Health and Medical Research Council clinical practice guidelines, which suggests that you assess, advise, assist and arrange, which is that sort of, well, 4 A's here, but it's the 5 A's model that's used widely in clinical practice guidelines. This is one of the resources that will be available for you to use in your practice, 8 for a healthy weight, and it includes some absolutely key messages, all of which are really helpful, I think, because one of the key points about them is none of these pieces of advice are going to cause anyone any harm, and they're the kind of things that you would provide to all of your families. That they're not targeting people who have a weight problem, so it's the kind of thing that can be universally available. So these are things around eating together, being active together, around drinking water, choosing fruits and vegetables as snacks, getting enough sleep, because we know that sleep is a really important correlate of overweight and obesity in children, being active together, and limiting screen time, which is of course something that is really challenging to change in families once it's been established. And this is another resource that you can give to parents that will be readily available on the website. So tips for your child and family, because a whole of family approach is considered best practice when we're talking about infants and young children. And also following on from Melissa's presentation, a guide to accurately measuring the height and indeed weight and plotting BMI on a BMI for age chart for infants and young children. And this is obviously the supine measure for little kids. I've actually never seen one lie like that. It's not how it usually goes, is it? And these are the body mass index for age charts that will be available, which, as you can see, I think a lot of you use the BMI for age charts on the Better Health channel. Is that still the case? Anyway, when I did some research a few years ago, that was the case, and the nurses I spoke to really loved those charts because they did have some indication of when a child was outside a healthy weight range, and that's indeed what these charts are going to provide. And this is an example of a model of care for intervening in families with children who might be above a healthy weight. So that's all I have for this presentation, but I'll be back again in another presentation, but really happy to take any questions if you have any. Is that my job to ask?
Give you the 5-minute sign.
I went a bit quickly. I've got my clock up here, so.
Well, Are there any pressing questions? Yes, up the back.
Yes, they're going to be available from that New South Wales Health Healthy Kids professional site, and yes, they're absolutely available anywhere in Australia. But it just happened to have been a New South Wales Health initiative. But yeah, absolutely for anyone. Yeah. Yes. No. Yes, absolutely. And thank you very much for introducing something that I've been standing on a soapbox about since 2001. I actually rang Medical Director when I was a PhD student and said, I was just wondering if you could add BMI for age charts for children into your software. And they basically laughed at me and said, well, yeah, we can for a fee. And of course, you know, I was a PhD student, so I've kind of been banging on about it for years, but New South Wales Health are actually in negotiations with our Medical Director and Best Practice to have BMI for age charts included as part of the software, and have sort of, they've really pushed that this is something that they really should be doing without a substantial fee, because it's so important. So I find it astounding that it's not there, but thank you for raising that. Hello. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question, and one that we get asked a lot. So BMI has sort of got a bit of a bad rap over the years. So what has happened is that in all age groups, BMI as a really simple population health kind of measure has been compared to direct measures of adiposity. So things like CAT scans or MRIs, you can measure fat down to the gram. And it is accurate in about 80% of people. So it is true that it will overestimate your BMI category if you are particularly muscular, but in children and in women and in people who are not bodybuilders, it is very, very accurate in terms of your risk for developing the comorbidities associated with overweight and obesity. And the people who are likely to be misclassified, it's really obvious that they've got more muscle mass than an average person. So it gets a bad rap, and it probably shouldn't. But thank you for asking that. Thank you.
Elizabeth, before you go, I know you're coming back, but a small gift for you from the organising committee.
And thank you very much.
Thank you for your great presentation and the resources. Thank you.
Thank you.